Hey, what's up? Jason here from Unity3D.college. Today I want to talk about MMO development. I've worked on quite a few MMORPG games, and throughout the years I've come across a couple, I'd say, tips that I wanted to share. These are mostly just from pain points that I ran into or I saw the teams I was on kind of fighting with. And I'm just going to share what I've learned and ways that can minimize your pain while you're doing this. So let's get started. Tip number one. This is by far the most important tip, and I wanted to share it first, is just to never, ever, ever trust the client. Now, this is true on just about any multiplayer game, but it's a lot more important when it comes to an MMO. In a regular multiplayer game, if somebody's cheating or doing something they're not supposed to, it could ruin the experience for a couple people, right? Whoever happens to be in the game with them. And if it's widespread, it could be a big issue. But if it's in an MMO and even just a couple people are cheating, you can totally destroy your game, ruin the whole economy, ruin the experience for a lot of people, maybe your whole player base. So it's very, very important that you just remember that anything that comes from the client is a lie. Right? You cannot trust it. If they say that they're moving to a specific spot, you need to verify that that move was correct. If they are trying to cast a spell, the client should only be saying, hey, I'd like to cast the spell. The server should check to see if it can, and anything else. If they want to equip an item, any command at all really needs to run through the server and needs to just be a request and a response. It should always assume that the client is lying, because the client will lie on every one of your entry points. There are people out there working on hacks while you're in development, so be ready for it. And just, again, never, ever, ever trust the client. Let me go on to slide 2. Again, number 2, second most important thing still, don't trust the damn client. And in this case, I wanted to talk about when you're sending information to the client. So early MMOs, we used to send down all of the data in a zone. So you'd see every NPC in the zone. You may not see full information about them, but you'd see a lot. Their health percent, their position, sometimes what items they were carrying, if those were visible. And as soon as that information's available, there are going to be hacked clients out there that show all of this stuff. So if you've got rare things off in some corner, if you're sending that up to every client that's in the zone, whether they're around it or not, they're going to find it. If you have things that are hidden and you're supposed to activate an ability or go hunt those things down, if you're sending those off to the client, they will be found. There's no question about it. Never trust anything on the client. Never send it anything that you don't want to be right up on their screen. Number 3, I wanted to talk about event systems versus looping systems. And this is more the difference between handling messages when they come in and not really doing much in the background, or constantly ticking and updating entities every frame. You really want to minimize any loops or updates that are happening regularly, because they're just terrible for performance, and they're most of the time just not doing anything. Now, if you have a simple loop that's just running on one NPC or something, it may seem fine, but then you get to the point where you've got thousands of these NPCs and suddenly your code is just falling apart. So you really want to minimize anything that you're doing in a loop or a tick type system and go with as much event-based stuff as possible. And by events, again, I mean, the client sends a message in, says, hey, I'm ready to do this thing, or an NPC sends a message to a system saying, hey, I'm ready to attack. Those just tend to perform a whole lot better, because most of the time you have a lot of these NPCs that are just kind of sitting by idle, and if they're running anything that has any weight at all, it just adds up and eventually kills your server performance. Let's go on to number 4, scripting. So I've seen many games try in early development to not have a scripting system or not have a scripting language, and they pretty much always end up needing to add something later. The alternative is that you have these hacky systems that your designers start trying to mesh together to make what they want work, and it ends up being messier and a lot harder to work with, both for you and the designers. You lose a lot of time just by trying to avoid this. And there are a couple different options for scripting systems. Lua is a very common one. A lot of people like to use it. Personally, I am not a big fan of the syntax, but it's common enough that you can easily find game designers who know it. There's also C# based ones, so if you're using Unity, you can do some C# based scripting. And I found that that's kind of helpful, but it doesn't really scale very well when you have a larger team, just because they have to be able to understand the code, and most game designers are not programmers. They're going to get confused in the code, and it could be a problem, but it's still probably better than the custom option where you just write your own language and then your own interpreter for it. That works great if you're really good at writing languages and you can think of everything that's going to need to happen, but it's not my ideal solution. I definitely choose a C# based one over that. And then the other option would be something more data driven. So I've worked on a couple games where the scripting system wasn't so much a scripting system as a list of commands kind of in a database where you say, hey, do this action, then do this action, then do this action, and then you kind of rearrange them in a tool that would update the order in a variable or a field, a column, there we go, in the database. And then you could loop around to those two. Those work, and they're relatively simple too. So if you really, really don't want to go with a full scripting system, at least set up some sort of a data-driven system. In one of the games that I worked on, they had that, and it actually ended up being the biggest table in the database by far. I think it was bigger than everything else in the database combined. So ideally, I think I'd still probably aim for a C# or Lua style scripting system, but a data-driven one will work as well if you don't want to go that route. But no matter what, you're going to need some sort of scripting system. Telling yourself that you can get away without it, you're just lying to yourself, because it's going to happen eventually. And if you try to slot it in at the end, it's going to be a lot harder than just planning for it in the beginning. All right, number 5, separate data from objects. And what I mean by this is that your database objects, or the classes that represent your database objects, or your just game design data objects, should be separate from your in-game classes. So if you have some ability data, that should not tie in and go directly onto an ability object in your class that's representing the actual ability happening. Same with item data. You want to have that stored data as a totally separate object that's just the data. And the biggest benefit here is that you can easily reload all of that data. So if you have to change something, if you make a change on your server, your designers are in there adding new items, it's a whole lot easier to just reload the table when all of this data is totally separated out from the objects, and the objects are just referencing their data by ID. So for instance, if you have an item, it's got like an item definition or an item template or something that represents what it is in the database. It has all of the stats and the name, that kind of thing. That could be split across multiple classes too. But if you, whatever that object is, you have that there, and then that has an ID, and then every item in a player's inventory doesn't know anything about that data other than the ID. Then when you want to look up stuff about that item, you just grab it from a dictionary or something else, some in-memory structure that just stores that item data, and you pull that in. Then you're not duplicating that data in memory. You just have it in there once, which is a good benefit. But 2, if you do an update, it's updated for everybody. You don't have to kind of go through messy code stuff like updating everybody's item with these new stats or whatever it is. So you want to make sure that all of this stuff is very separated out. It also makes building tooling a whole lot easier, because then you can share those same classes in your game and in your tooling, assuming that you're in C# for both. All right, number 6, SQL is much greater than flat files or NoSQL. And I've seen this countless times where, well, teams had SQL servers and things were nice and easy. Getting updates done, updating data was easy, building tools was easy. Or other teams that had flat files or NoSQL solutions. And in those cases, it was always a nightmare. And you got to think about it like this. If you have designers that, say you just have the simplest solution or the simplest problem where you've got a game, you add a new class into your game, and you're using flat files for all of your data. And all of your flat files have the class name in there for what classes are available, and it's like a comma separated list. And this is stuff I've seen. Then when you add that new class in, you have to write a script to go through and find all of the correct items, all of the items that you want to add the class onto, and then have that go in and update every single file, check all those files in, and just hope it's good. And that's not something, one, that your game designers can do. So you're going to end up having somebody in there writing custom code to do these changes. And Two, it's just a giant pain in the ass. Right? If this is all in data, it can be as simple as pulling them up in a list view or having a set of classes and just updating that class set instead of having a specific entry. And there may be other cases too where, like, say you just want to take all of these items and increase the max level from 50 to 100 or whatever it is. Again, if you have to batch update thousands of flat files, you're just going to run into problems. It also makes searching for things extremely difficult. Say you want to find all of the items level 5 to 10 that are one-handed slash. Suddenly, you're either scanning through tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of files, or you're building some search system that's now grabbing all that data, aggregating it, and then linking back to the files, essentially trying to recreate a lot of the functionality that you get for free in a SQL server. Number 7. This one may deserve to be number 1 or 2, really, but it's extremely important. The tooling in game development is extremely important. In MMO development, it's one of the most important things that you can have. It's vital. If you have bad tooling, you need more designers to do the same amount of work. 1 or 2 good tool designers, 2 tool developers can cut your dev team in half, right? Just by making it nice and fast and easy for game designers to go in there and do what they need to do. A lot of people totally ignore this in the beginning. They'll start working on game system after game system after game system, and they'll leave it. People are manually putting things into the database or editing things in what feels like an Excel style app, or literally in Excel or Access. And it's fine in the beginning. It feels okay because you've just got the 1 or 2 people that really know what they're doing and they understand the system completely. But then as soon as you start hiring people on, their productivity is half what it could be or less, right? Because they're now having to deal with these archaic, crappy tools to get things done. They may not have the ability to reload things and test things because their data is not separated out. And essentially, you just end up wasting a lot of time, a lot of money, and making people sad. Building good tools I'd say it's, other than not trusting the client, it's probably the most important thing if you really want to get your game done and get it good. So that you just build good tools. Spend time on it. Don't ignore it. Don't shove it off to the most junior person on the team and have them try to do it. I've seen that at many places too. It's like people come in. I think that's one of the things I did when I was super junior. I had no idea what the hell I was doing with tools and made plenty of mistakes and could have made them a lot better. But it's also where I kind of realized how important they are. So super important. Build good tools. Number 8, designers are not optional. Hopefully I don't have to explain this too much, but some people get the idea that they can just build an MMO and then auto-generate all the content, right? We'll just, we'll make it all programmatic and it'll be super fun. The problem with that is auto-generated content usually feels like auto-generated content. It's just not as engaging, not as interesting, and it's not going to really make for a great game, especially not in an MMO. You need game designers who know what they're doing, who are good and can build out a fun, engaging world, build out fun, engaging gameplay systems, and whatever other systems you need. Just remember that you can't do it all on your own. It's not just code. You need a lot of game design. Most of the teams I've worked on, game design was twice the size of the programming team, so expect it to be huge, and there's a lot of work to do. Again, you can minimize that with the good tools, but you still can't get rid of it completely. Number 9, I don't know if this is really MMO specific, but it's really just to make as much of your code and your systems reusable. So if you have a system that checks, for instance, one of the ones I did recently, conditions. It just checks conditions on targets, like, hey, is this thing above some health percent and this level and this class, with this move speed? If so, then this thing can happen. If you build a different system like that for every single type of thing, like different for weapons, different for equipping items, different for casting spells, different for getting quests, well, one, you're just writing a shitload of extra code and duplicating probably a lot of that code across them. 2, you're making it a lot harder for your game design team, because now they have to remember, how do I hook up a condition for this thing? How do I hook up a condition for that thing? And yeah, it's mainly those two. Those two things are very important. If you make your systems nice and reusable and just have systems hook into other systems and use them for the functionality that they need, you'll save a lot of time, your code will be better, your project will be easier to maintain, and a whole lot easier to work on. 10, saving money with Linux. So a lot of people think probably a little too early about their server costs, but then again, a lot of people also just don't think about it at all. Just remember that whatever number of servers you're going to run, they're going to require some multiple of that in actual physical hardware servers. And if you can get your server to run in Linux, it will save you a lot of money. I mean, just looking at the prices on AWS and Azure, I think last time I checked, it was nearly half the price to run in Linux. But I also put the word later here. Don't do this as like your first thing that you do. Build your game, get your game going. When it's actually feeling feasible and you're sure it's actually going to ship, then start just making sure that you can do a Linux build too. In Unity, that's not too hard. As long as you don't start pulling in any Windows specific stuff, you should be fine. But it's just important to think about and just to remember. Let's go on to the next one. This is super important. So saving state from underlined one place. This is just that you don't want multiple things saving your player's state. Now, the reason for this is dupes, right? And dupes, exploits, even the possibility of losing player data. So one of the easiest ways to dupe in old MMO games was to just take an item, do something with that item, and then zone away before the server has saved. So go into an instance or something, go into another zone, and then a lot of time what'll happen is it'll pull that data straight from the database. The other item hasn't been deleted from the database yet, and now you've got 2, right? So maybe you've given away the other item or traded it or something like that, or sold it to a merchant right before you zoned away, and that other one didn't save yet because there's some delay there to minimize performance issues. This is the kind of shit that happens, right? Like, it's like, oh yeah, we instant save when you trade. Oh, but now we need to add a little bit of a delay because we're getting lag. They add that delay, and all of a sudden you can dupe just by selling or trading and running across a zone line or something. So you really want to minimize your saves, or at least the locations that save. There should probably be one spot in code that saves the delta of your character, and really it should ideally not save from the zone server at all. It should have a separated persistence layer there. Personally, I'm a big fan of using a distributed memcache so that all the data just goes in and out of that, and it's never written to the database except for by that, so you don't have to worry so much about database latency. But then in that case, you also need to always pull from it whenever you're going to use the inventory. So you need to not trust the local server cache too, in case something else has changed it. Another option that I've seen in some games too is just building out a dedicated persistence server. But again, in that case, you need to make sure that your zone servers aren't also able to persist stuff. So if you're going to go that route, just make sure that you have a persistent server and nothing else can read or write character data. They can read or write content stuff, whatever. Or actually, I guess they should really just read content stuff. But they should never read or write character data if you're going to go with a persistent server style system. Otherwise, you'll end up with the same problem of these race conditions where one server saves, the other server overwrites, and now you've duplicated stuff. Another one, don't query the database. So this kind of goes along with what I was just saying, but this is more on a performance basis. So if you've got a SQL server full of tens of thousands of items, just load all those 10,000 items right at the start. Don't start making queries, at least not to a SQL server, at runtime, when it's like on demand, because as soon as there's a little bit of a hitch in that database, something slows down a little bit, so a bunch of zones come up all of a sudden and start beating up that database, you're going to run into problems. It's going to ruin the the experience for your players, because they're going to get that lag spike, and you just don't want to do it. Now, I'd say the same is true for reading character data, writing character data. Try to really minimize that. Go to a memcache, go to Redis, something where you're really not writing or blocking on SQL at all. Okay. And then if you do, so if you are writing to your database, now this could be that you just said, screw it, I don't care. Well, we're going to let our own servers write, or whatever servers they are, write to the database. Or maybe you got it all cleaned up and it's all in a persist one. The key point here is to, if you want to, say, trade an item, give an item from one player to another player, just change the owner ID of that item in the database. Do not delete and recreate that item. Don't do deletes and inserts when an update will work. So if it's an item or some other thing that's just getting transferred, again, this is mostly for trades and transferring of ownership of things. Just don't do insert and delete. It's, again, just another way to end up with a dupe, right? You had one item that was created, and then somehow some player found a way to exploit it and get a second item there, and that item could never be duplicated if your trade code cannot add a new item, if it can only change ownership. Now, this also requires you to only change ownership on the server side too. Don't create a new item instance and then delete the old one, because then you're going to end up, when you go to save, something's going to be wrong, and who knows which person's going to get the item, right? Or maybe you're going to end up creating another one and accidentally running an insert because of it. So just change ownership. Don't delete and recreate things. Same goes with trades. God, trades are like the worst. I remember one of the projects was on, you would drop a item into a trade window, you would delete the item and recreate a new temporary proxy item. So the item was gone on the server, not from the database though, but gone from the player's inventory on the server, and this new thing was created, and then many different ways to get that new thing to come back as an item and get your old item back, or get the item to trade. It was a big mess. So don't do that. Just move items around, move ownership of things. And number 14, on the subject of moving things, if you think your game is going to be successful at all and you want people to be able to transfer servers, or you want to be able to merge different servers, using a GUID is a whole lot better than using an int, because writing server merge processes sucks. It's slow, it's painful. It's one of the big downsides to SQL Server. But if you just don't use integer IDs and use these suckers instead, it's a whole lot easier, because then you can just kind of copy the data over, and maybe you'll have a couple conflicts, but you probably won't. And if you do, it's easy to resolve. If you go with integer IDs, it's always a nightmare. It's a slow process. It requires server downtime, and it's just not fun. So I highly recommend setting your primary keys like that. I think that's all I had for today. I've probably got a lot of other things I'll share later. If anybody has questions, though, just about MMO development and some of the differences, or if any of the things I said just didn't make sense, wasn't really clear, just drop a comment below. I'll try to get to all of them and maybe do a follow-up video on this subject. I think it's pretty interesting, and MMOs are a ton of fun to work on. So, there are some serious guidelines, but you're pretty much always going to have fun working on these projects. So if you can get into one and do some development there, I highly recommend it. Just make sure, watch out for the pitfalls, build some good tools, and of course that never, ever, 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 ever trust the client. Rule number 1. All right, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And again, drop a comment if you have any questions. And that's it. Thanks.